Good morning, everyone. So instead of doing the usual content that I had scheduled for this week, I've decided instead I want to pivot and I want to address what's happening in our society, in our world, from my perspective, from a bit of a deeper look, a deeper analysis into what's happening socially and collectively with all the unrest and the upheaval and everything that's happened both post-shooting of Charlie Kirk and before. Obviously there's been a lot of societal momentum in this direction for a long time. And it's really been weighing heavy on my heart post-shooting. I've been really just sitting with, what does all this mean? Why does all of this feel different? And sitting with, what's the mechanics of what we're dealing with? What is it we really need to understand from multiple perspectives, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually? What are the mechanics of what we're dealing with here? And this is what I want to speak to. So this week, my content's going to be a little deeper. It's going to be maybe a little heavier, maybe a little bit more at the core of things. But hopefully through this, you'll get some really good insight into human nature, perhaps into yourself or into other people. So with all that being said, I wanted to do a video today on my definition of what evil is. Now, this is something I, thought about deeply for a very long time. I think about things on my own a lot when I don't have satisfactory answers for why something happens or what something is in the world. So for me, it's not good enough to simply know that evil exists. It does. It's real. It's not simply good enough to kind of point the finger blindly and go XYZ is evil. I want to know how evil comes to be, what the mechanics of evil are, and how this shows up in life over and over, why this shows up in life over and over. And for me, as someone who's trained in neurolinguistic programming and hypnotherapy, I think of these things in terms of structure and process. Not just the abstracts of good versus evil and what does this mean spiritually or what is that from some more broad descriptive view, but I look at it in terms of what is the process of evil? How is evil created? So this is what I want to explain to you. So let's go ahead and get right into it and then I'll unpack it a bit with you and we will call it a video here. So again, I spent a long time thinking about evil because I really wanted to understand it on my own terms, in my own way. So take it or leave it. This may not fit for you, but here's how I understand evil. If we really strip it back to process, and we really look at what processes generate the effect or the experience of evil, I think we can break it down to simply one thing that I was not expecting when I first started to think about this. But think about this with me. Evil is the belief and the acting on the belief that the ends justifies the means. So evil always, from my perspective, and go ahead and think about this, think this through, look at this, evil always involves some form of acting on the belief that the ends justifies the means. Now, you may have heard that phrase and you may not know exactly what it means, so let me break that down for you really quickly. Ends justifies the means is a belief or a worldview or perspective where we look at the outcome of what we want and we basically believe that however we get there, as long as we get what we want, as long as we get the outcome, it's fair game. So ends justifies the means says basically it doesn't matter how you arrive at getting what you want so long as you get what you want. Now, when we map that out and we look at evil, whether you're talking collective evil, whether you're talking the evil actions of one person, even when you're talking classical notions of spiritual evil, this pattern fits over and over, that there's a core belief there that the outcome, so long as it's reached, however we get there is justified. Now, I want to be clear here, because maybe you're saying, well, what are the exceptions where that's not true? What about, parenting, for example, and maybe you have to, protect your kid, and it's going to upset them in the short term. You're going to do something that's going to piss them off, but in the long term, it's going to keep them healthy and safe, and that's being a good parent. Let me explain. Evil, in my perspective, is a subset, is a smaller subsection of ends justifies the means. So are there examples and moments where ends justifies the means can be the right choice or the healthy choice and not result in an evil outcome? Yes. So ends justifies the means is a larger category inside of which evil is a subcategory. But I would argue, personally, and we could have a discussion, leave a comment down below if you want to talk about this. I would argue that the cases where ends justifies the means is done in a healthy, constructive, positive way are rare and few. In other words, if we want to take this approach to life, that the ends justifies the means, and as long as we're getting the good outcome, how we get there doesn't matter, I think we have to be really shrewd and intelligent and discerning about when we engage in that behavior, because ends justifies the means is often a very slippery slope to evil. So yes, it can be healthy, yes, it can be done right, but I would say that those are the exception, and that generally when we are engaging in ends justifies the means, whether we mean to or not, whether it's conscious or unconscious, it ends up being evil. Now, why would this be? From my perspective, when it comes to human beings, how we do things, in other words, the relational tone, the relational energy, the sense of connectedness, attunement, win-win, that sense of really feeling connected for human beings, I think is more important, more often than not, than the outcome itself. So if you do things in a way that violates that sense of connectedness between us, it will be damaging. And that might be the purpose, that might be the point, and that would be largely how evil goes down, is it's intentionally damaging. But also, I think we can be unintentionally damaging and still end up damaging others. And this can have a ripple effect of generating evil too, right? For example, let's say the basic example here, the overly strict authoritarian parent who believes that the ends justifies the means and is overly harsh on their kids, and then their kids rebel, and their kids go this whole other way, and maybe their kids end up with kind of like a dysfunctional life because their parent was not really like working in the spirit of connection, but rather in the spirit of my way is the right way. So there are tons of examples where we could map this out, and this is, again, a larger life principle, but this is how I see the genesis of evil. So when we look at the landscape of what's going on socially, and I don't want to get into sides, I don't want to get into specifics, I kind of balk at identifying with any one particular political tribe or current or thought, because I'm more interested in alignment with my own values and alignment with what I think are true, right values, and following that regardless of quote unquote side or tribe. But if we want to map this out to what's going on both sides here in the US, and this is not just a US phenomenon. There's issues going on all over the world right now, obviously. But if we want to look at both sides in the US as an example, I see major places where not only historically or in big instances, but even in small micro instances on, say, social media or in media in general, right? Influencer culture, podcasts, news shows, there is this violation of this principle, again, where the ends justifies the means. In other words, the hype, the rhetoric, the shaming, the judging, the blaming, the wounding each other at a relational level psychologically in society ends up creating just a massive momentum and a massive field of wounding. And this field of wounding ends up creating resonance with retaliation, with control, with manipulation, with wanting to regain understanding, etc. And that sets the momentum up for a lot of what we see unfolding here in the US, in our country, and globally as well. Okay, so I feel like I said my piece. I'm rambling a bit here. So let me just kind of summarize this with you guys. And I would love to hear your thoughts and your perspectives in the comments below. So just to refresh and rehash, evil is really when we act upon the belief that the ends justifies the means without good discernment. So how does that land for you as you hear that? Does that resonate? Do you disagree? Do you agree? I realize that this idea runs counter to the way a lot of people like to run their lives, and the way we think that often perhaps things should be run in our country or in the world. So this is deeply contrarian. This challenges each of us to become aware of our own capacity for evil, because a lot of us believe that the ends do justify the means. There are a lot of us who are so hung up on the outcome that by all means necessary is totally acceptable in our book. And that is the mindset of evil from what I'm saying here. So this is an invitation for all of us to really self-reflect and look and go, hey, am I, unconsciously, unwittingly, through this belief and the actions that come from this belief, participating or generating or otherwise engaged in something that could create evil, right? This means we all have to look at ourselves. So with that being said, how does this land for you? Is this useful? Is this helpful? Does this clarify things for you? And if it does or doesn't, either way, I'd love to know. Leave me a comment down below. I'll talk to you guys in the next one.